And now, marine weather around Alaska.
Tonight's weather showing this weakening front edging its way eastward across the Bering Sea and just dragging across the central Aleutians. Some light precipitation there. Stronger up here, so the winds and rain will pick up here for St. Lawrence Island, and an area of rain and gusty winds sliding eastward there across the western Brooks Range. Out to the Arctic coast, scattered showers continue but should slowly diminish here from the southeast interior into the northern panhandle. This next storm coming up starts to bear down Kodiak Island tomorrow afternoon. Otherwise, kind of a breaking condition, a little more in the way of sunshine here for the Madawaska-Sitna Valley Cook Inlet area. And not too bad, just some scattered afternoon showers developing over the mountainous terrain along the North Gulf Coast. And this area of rain starting to push in toward the central coast of the Panhandle. And rain for the North Slope and Arctic coast starting to improve a little bit back to the west with this next front, and south winds with rain from St. Lawrence Island right on up into the northwest coast. Another system here pushing more rain into the Pribilof Islands and eastward from Adak into the Nikolsky area. Mostly sunny for the Alaska Peninsula and Bristol Bay. And then for the day on Wednesday, cloudy and wet here in the west with this low pressure area and trough complex here all the way up to the western Arctic coast. And this system bringing gale force winds and rain up into the North Gulf Coast. Rain heavy at times from, say, Whittier eastward there to Cordova, Yakutat. Rain over the northern panhandle, dry with maybe some clearing down to the south there. This low approaching southern Kodiak Island. Winds on the increase there through the Copper River Basin out of the south, and pretty gusty east-southeast winds here across south central Alaska. Not too bad up toward the Alaska Range and to the north with most of the sunshine from around the Tanana Valley right on up to the eastern Arctic coastal areas. And out to the west, just another system back there. No big storms, but that'll bring some showers in, mostly north of the western Aleutians. For the coastal water forecast here for the south coast, south winds 10 knots, otherwise about the same here for the central coast, and south or east to southeast winds at 10 to 15 knots for the north coast. Southeast at 10 for Stevens Passage and Lynn Canal. Light variable winds for Clarence Strait, and those seas down to 2 feet. Outlook for Wednesday, winds increase along the coast. Here for the south coast, looking at southeast winds 20 to 30 knots, and gusty east winds 25 to 30 knots on the central coast, and east winds 25 to 35 knots for the north coast, with these seas here building 15 to 20 feet. North at 10 knots, Lynn Canal, Stevens Passage area, Clarence Strait southeast at 10. And for the North Gulf Coast tomorrow, east winds 15 to 20 knots. Small craft advisories for the Barren Islands, east winds picking up to 25 knots, Kamishak Bay east at 20. Cook Inlet, west-southwest breeze at 10 knots and east winds at about 15 knots for Prince William Sound. And then for Wednesday, that front coming up, gale force winds 40-knot easterlies here for Kamishak Bay and the Barren Islands. Otherwise, the North Gulf Coast looking at east winds 35 to 45 knots there with seas 15 to 17 feet. And gale warnings are out for Prince William Sound for east winds at 35 knots and seas up to 8 feet. Otherwise, Cook Inlet, good small craft advisories with northeast winds at 30 knots and seas 8 to 10 feet. For Tuesday, Kodiak Island, northeast winds 30 to 35 knots and light variable winds here for Bristol Bay at about 15 knots, about that same pattern on the Bering Sea side of the Alaska Peninsula. Otherwise, the Pacific side of the peninsula looking at northeast to north winds at 15 to 25 knots. And for the day Wednesday, Bristol Bay, northeast winds 20 knots, southeast winds 20 to 25 knots here in the Bering Sea side of the peninsula. The Pacific side, west-southwest 15 to 20. Kodiak Island, pretty brisk on those winds out of the east at 30 knots with seas 10 to 15 feet. And for the eastern Aleutians, south winds 25 knots tomorrow, seas 6 feet. Central Aleutians, south to southwest 25 knots. Small craft advisories for the western Aleutians for southwest winds 25 to 30 knots. Wednesday, Western Aleutians, west-southwesterlies at 25 knots, and winds mostly west at 25 knots for Adak and Atka. Seas out here at about 7 feet, and west winds at 25 knots for the Fox Islands with seas 7 to 8 feet. And for the southwest coast, looking at southerly winds for the day tomorrow at 20 to 25 knots here. Small craft advisories, Pribilof Island, St. Matthew Island, south winds 25 to 30 knots. And St. Lawrence Island, Norton Sound, south winds 25 knots. And then for the day Wednesday, southeast at 20 for St. Lawrence Island, Norton Sound, southeast at 25. Southeast winds 25 knots here for the southwest coast, northeast at 20, St. Matthew Island, Pribilofs, west winds 25 knots, seas 7 feet. Up along the eastern Beaufort Sea coast tomorrow, looking at west-southwest winds, small craft advisory winds at 25 knots with 5-foot seas. West at 20 on the central coast, and then back up to 25 knots from the southwest for the western Arctic coast and the Chukchi Sea. Small craft advisories, south winds 25 to 30 knots with seas 6 to 8 feet. And then for Wednesday, for the Chukchi Sea, south to southeast winds 25 to 30 knots and seas running 6 to 9 feet. South at 25 for the western Arctic coast, and the central and east side, south winds 15 to 20 knots.